Hello, everyone. Not for the remote people, unless you ate lunch too, but how's everybody feeling after lunch? Need to stretch or do a backflip or anything? We're good? How is today going so far? How are you feeling about the value and the insights that you're getting? Good? Thumbs up? All right. I don't think they're going to give me a thumbs up. A thumbs down if it was bad anyways. All right, everyone. So welcome. This session is the one I was most excited about when I read the run of show that the team was building for this event for two reasons. One, when I go to a conference or a workshop, I love hearing like the top level, high level stuff about insights and data and research. But the thing I appreciate more is, okay, cool. I see that I need to do something. Now show me how to do it. Right? Practical, simple advice. And we have an audience with a very decorated board chair who will have a chance to introduce himself in a minute shortly. But this is where you're going to learn the real stuff. You're going to hear the real stories, which is why I really love this session. Second reason I just mentioned it, Mike, who will give us an introduction here in a minute, has a very similar journey as I have serving on a local advisory board. And we're going to be sharing his story, and I might add some commentary as we go along, so that you could walk away going, oh, I either work with board members or I'm going to have to work with board members one day. That is what they look like. That is how they sound. This is how they work with us. So I just want you to let your shoulders loose a little bit, have a little bit of fun in this conversation because it's casual. And more importantly, I think that it'll be helpful to everyone. Cool? Sound like a plan? All right. So we're going to ask you to introduce yourself. And in your introduction, obviously state your name, state what do you do for a living. But one thing I'm going to also ask you to do is something I steal from when we do intros at LinkedIn. I want you to share with the audience one thing about you that people would not know just by looking at your resume or your LinkedIn profile. Just a fun fact about you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joey. It's my pleasure to be here. I want to first let everybody know that board members aren't the scary animal that some of you guys might think. So my name is Mike Griffiths. My profession right at the moment is I'm a Torrance City Council member. I've been on the Torrance City Council for the last 10 years, actually getting ready to retire from that. I'm being termed out in April, actually, right after this election. So I'm looking forward to being able to spend more time with Salvation Army. But the last 10 years has really kept me busy on the city council. Prior to that, I was a small business owner here locally in Torrance. I had a computer business, so I'm kind of a tech nerd. I keep my propeller hat in my briefcase, which I didn't bring today. But I really enjoy working with the Salvation Army. The unique thing about me that most people don't know about is that I'm a ballroom dancer for the last 20 years. And I enjoy ballroom dancing. It's one of my fun things. I look forward to doing a whole lot more of that in my upcoming retirement.
Like professional level ballroom dancing? Like Dancing with the Stars, or just like weekend ballroom dancer? All right. So he's already making me look bad in front of everyone because my wife's been asking me to learn some kind of dance, and now you're putting the pressure on. We also, in talking at lunch, found out that we have a similar story in terms of when we joined an advisory organization and kind of like the journey that we went on. So that's what I want you to talk about with the audience, just so they get to know a little bit more about your background and the context of which you came, not only a board member, but as a chair. So if you could share with the group, one, how did you first come into contact with the Salvation Army? How did you get to know them? And then how did that ultimately lead you to joining a local board?
Yeah, so shortly after I got on city council in Torrance, all of a sudden everybody knows you, and I don't know everybody else. And I really didn't know that the Torrance Salvation Army existed as a corps in our city, ironically. And so shortly after I got on the city council, the current board chair at that time, who was a former city council member himself, came up to me and said, "Hey, Mike, we would love to introduce you to the Torrance Salvation Army Corps." And he invited me down for a tour and invited me to attend one of the advisory board meetings. And I did, and I was totally blown away at what's going on right under my nose that I didn't even know about for all these years. And I was so impressed with what the Corps was doing in Torrance that I said, absolutely, I would love to be a part of this. It's something that, as a council member, my focus is, serving the community. And that's something that's the reason I got on city council in the first place. And this was a perfect extension of what the Salvation Army does, is they serve the community. So I said, this is a match made in heaven for me, and I want to be involved. And what the Torrance Corps was doing and some of their plans that they were working on were just really phenomenal. I said, absolutely, sign me up. So I became a board member in 2014. And the board that was there, they'd been around for a long time. And it was an exciting place, but the board wasn't very exciting. And I kind of was getting bored, and I recruited some additional people to join the board from my connections. And after a couple of years, some of the newer members started to say, well, this board isn't really doing anything. And what can we do to, make this board feel like we're actually doing something? We don't want to just sit here and have lunch, as some people might joke about, is that we're more than coming to meet and have lunch. We want to do something. And the people that I recruited them on the basis of, this is an organization that you can sink your teeth into and actually do something with if you want to. But the current board wasn't. And so I talked with the executive leader of our Corps, and I said to him, how come in 3 years we haven't even had a board election for chair and vice chair and things like that? And I said, don't you think it's about time maybe we should do that? And so the executive finally said, yeah, I think maybe it's time. So he spoke to the current board chair, because I didn't want to let him know that I was kind of plotting all this. And so he said, I think it's time we have an election. And so some of the newer members that I recruited onto the board nominated me to be the new board chair. And it became obvious very quickly that the whole advisory board wanted new leadership. And so I took it over under the pretenses that we're going to make this board be an active board that's doing things that are interesting and exciting. And that's been my mission since I got on as chair in 2017. So now I'm starting my 7th year as board chair, and I just hope I'm not wearing out my welcome. But it's been a really exciting time. We've done a lot of interesting things in those 7 years that I'm really glad I stuck it out, because I think many of the board members at that time were really thinking about, why am I a part of this? I'm going to go do something else that's more interesting. But we were able to salvage that, grow the board, and turn it around and get people excited about being on our board.
And that's a very relevant framing of your background, because remember, in this breakout session, we're talking about creating and sustaining a board in a small to mid-sized community. And guess what size of community most Salvation Army Corps are in? Small to mid-size, right? So this is important for everybody to understand, because unlike a large metropolitan area where you have, larger footprint, different politics, small to mid-sized communities have their own unique dynamic. And so we want everybody to really understand, if you're working with leaders in a small to mid-sized community, what things are important to them, and how do you connect with them and invite them to be a part of the work. So we're going to spend a little bit more time. I might even throw you a curveball and deviate a little bit from the questions here. Again, we were talking at lunch, and we had mentioned that both of us joined a Salvation Army board, local board, in 2014, and both of us became a chair in 2017. So I want to spend a little bit more time there, because the audience of these breakout sessions are a lot of new officers who are not like rebranding a board or rebuilding a board, but building one from scratch. And I really want for them to get an impression from a leader like you. What is it that inspired you to commit in the first place? What was it about the officer's pitch? What was it about what you saw, what you experienced, that really, going back before you became chair, and then we'll go to the chair thing in a minute here, was really what got you or hooked you to become involved in the first place? So here's the question. They invite you to join a meeting, and from the point that you first came into contact with the board and the ministry to the point where you decided on being a board member, what was it about what you saw that inspired you to be a board member in the first place? And what was it that officer did to solidify your commitment to join the board?
You're really testing my memory. It seems like it's been forever. So 10 years ago, when I was invited to that first board meeting, like I said, I went in there with no understanding of at all of what the Salvation Army was doing in our city. And actually, it's not just Torrance; it's multiple communities around the Torrance. So it's actually a fairly large area that we cover. The board was very small at the time. There was only maybe 12 or so board members that were active, and many of them I'd known throughout the community for many years. So I was familiar. I wasn't, I was already comfortable with everybody there, so that made it a little bit easy to step in. But the facilities there were something I had no idea that was going on. And actually, at that time, the Torrance Corps was going through a major rebuilding of some building of new facilities. That was just amazing to me to hear that they're going to be building a music and dance studio and a recording studio and all these phenomenal facilities that were going to be put there as a result of some tremendous donations that were provided to the Torrance Corps. And so that was exciting right off the bat for me, and that's not likely to be common in most corps, is to have that kind of luxury of having those phenomenal facilities being built. But that was something that really appealed to me, and something as simple as the Red Kettle thing, which everyone is familiar with the Red Kettle program. And here I thought, well, this is something that's nice. It's, I can be a part of the Red Kettle program, which I already kind of knew about. It's not something that's foreign to me. I've seen it every year for years and years throughout my whole life. And so I can be a part of that, and we'll find other things that we can do to help grow what the Torrance Corps is doing. We had a homeless arm of our Corps that had a separate facility that was serving the homeless with food and meals and education. And that was a big thing that was of interest to me. And so all these things just said, this is exactly what I personally wanted to be doing at that time in my life, is serving the community. And so the match was perfect for me. The executive there at the time, he was just very friendly and cordial to me. He took an interest in me personally, and he spent a little bit of time getting to know me. And it was very warm and comfortable because I knew many of the board members. The executive was very warm towards me. And it just was an easy decision for me to say, yeah, I want to be a part of this. And had I not taken some steps along the way, I might have dropped out because the board really wasn't doing anything at the time. So I took it upon myself, along with some of the newer board members that I brought on, to say, we have such a great opportunity here. Let's do something with this. Let's make this board feel like it's something that you really want to be a part of, that makes you feel like at the end of the day you've done something good for the community besides having lunch 12 times a year. And so we started that process, and it's been a slow evolution ever since then. But we've grown the board. We've added new things that are exciting for people to be involved in. We've more formalized our board. We've developed committees that were never there before. We've got people with job duties and expectations, and so it's much more formalized than it was when I joined. But I think people want that. I think people need a little structure in order to feel a part of something and to give themselves small leadership roles, being a committee chair or a committee member, and being involved in those ways. And so it's been a really nice evolution that hasn't been forced. It's been at the pace that everybody wanted to do, not just my own pace. I mean, obviously, I'd love to see some of the things I wanted to do happen faster, but when you're working with volunteers, you just got to do what you can with them. And so we did, and it's been a really, really fun journey, and I look forward to continuing that.
Here's what I loved about the way you framed it. Again, in a city that's not Los Angeles, right, or New York or Houston, you have leaders like Mike who are very well connected, have a lot of responsibility. So on one hand, it might be hard to land you. On the other hand, if you do get someone like him on your board, there's a lot of upside, a lot of potential benefits, like being connected to city government and being connected to those networks. And so I want to frame the following question for the audience in a particular way. From my experience, and I think you would agree, once we get an invitation to join a board, the first thing that we look at is, do I want to be affiliated with this organization? Do I want to run the other way, run to you or run from you? And from my experience, with some exception, the vast majority of people love and appreciate the Salvation Army and what it does. So you're good there. But then the next thing that we move on to is asking the question, is this board either a board that has its act together, it's well ran, it's well organized, and I don't have to waste a lot of my time, or I don't have to do a bunch of work, and that's something that is attractive to me because I'm a city council member and I have a lot of responsibilities. So A, it's well organized and easy for me to serve, or is it B, is this going to take me a little bit of work, but I have an opportunity to make an impact? Because people like Mike like to roll up their sleeves and make impact and drive change. It sounds like for you, it was number 2. Like you joined the board and you wanted to make an impact. So can you describe a little bit about, outside of the fact that the board was ready for a change because they weren't necessarily doing anything, how you and the officer decided on how you wanted to divide and conquer on taking the board from where it was to where you wanted to be, particularly for newer cadets who are trying to figure out the right starting place for someone who's very busy?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. When I became chair, a little unexpectedly, I was kind of not hoping to take on that role because I'd already taken on the big role of being a city council member. But because I was kind of the rallying force to push for the change, I decided to accept that task of leading the board. And so one of the first objectives that I had, because it wasn't there when I was brought on, is to develop a meaningful tool that you can give to prospective board members to help them understand what is it all about to be a board member for the Salvation Army. And so with the help of my executives, we created this little brochure that just describes exactly what exactly it means to be a board member and what the expectations of the board member are, even to the point of saying we meet on the first Tuesday of the month at lunch. And so we put together this little outline of what it means to be a board member for the Torrance Corps. And with that now in hand, I can go to anybody in the community that might have any interest in joining our board. I can give them that. And without having to spend a whole lot of time, by them reading this little simple brochure, they understand already what we need them to be able to commit to if they want to be interested in serving on our board. And so that's our first thing now, is every prospective board member now has to agree to have read this item and agree to the requirements of the member expectations that we put in our brochure that tells them exactly what we expect of them as a board member. And if they agree to all that, then we go through the process of interviewing them with our exec board and our board development people, and then we put them to a vote for our whole board to see if we want that person on our board or not. And it's a really straightforward but very easily well-defined process that makes it so much clearer, and everybody gets treated exactly the same way. We're still formalizing that. We change this from time to time. We change our expectations from time to time. Just as any board, as they grow, they need to make changes to make it reflect the current situations. And so it's been a really helpful way that we've made that process much more easy for all of our board members to go out and recruit, because to me, that's been one of the most challenging aspects of my chairmanship on the board, is recruiting good board members who are there for the right reasons. There's people out there that just want to have another board listed on their resume or on LinkedIn or whatever, and those are not the people that we want. We want people who are there to get their hands dirty, so to speak, and to do stuff and make things happen with our Torrance Corps. And so we want to make sure that they understand what we expect from them, that everything's well defined ahead of time, so nobody can come back and say, well, you didn't tell me we were having to do this, that, or the other thing. And it's all clear right from the get-go, and it's a smooth process. Everybody knows where they are expected, and it works really well, and we're able to recruit people, although COVID put a damper on recruitment. We weren't meeting in person, and it was really challenging to do anything over that. But now we're back into the rebuilding our board and we're trying to grow our board. We're at 17 members now. We'd like to grow that up to at least 25. I think we would love to see us have that type of a board Because with that many people that are really focused on doing things in the community, we're going to be able to do some really good stuff. And I'm so excited for the possibility for us to get to that level.
No wonder they want to keep you as board chair. She keeps getting better and better. So let's pause for a minute and take context of really what Mike is speaking to, because I want all of you to walk away with this framing in your mind of this thing that I often talk about when it comes to boards. The easiest way to figure out whether you are running a good board or not is pretend you're on the board. If you were serving as an officer on your own board, how would you rate the experience? What is it like to be recruited by you, if you were being recruited by you? What is it like to be onboarded by you as an officer? What is it like to be in one of your board meetings? And if you take that human approach, you start to get a really quick sense of if it's really good or maybe not so good. And then you identify, well, if I was a board member, these are the things that I would want. These are the things that I would be looking for. And it simply gives you a bullseye on things that you need to move or maneuver or adjust or adopt in order to create a really good experience. One thing that you said that really stood out to me was the officer was building a relationship with you. It wasn't always just, can you join the board? And that was kind of like the party starter, right? But then you mentioned, if I may see that document that you had about onboarding, then you mentioned how over time you work with the officer or officers on how to create this really simple to digest and understand board member requirements outline. Now, this is a fancy version of it, but really what Mike is speaking to is one thing that I urge a lot of officers to focus on doing, which is if you're recruiting someone to join your board, the first thing that you should do is make it easy for someone to say yes or no to joining your board, right? Okay, cool. You have my attention. What? And you're either going to give a blank stare or you're going to give something that's really good like this. Says, this is what our expectations are. This is what we need as a commitment from you. And then it helps really busy people like Mike go, okay, I can do that. I can't do that until later on, or I can't do that at all. And that's really creating a really good experience, and this is a really good example of doing that. So make it easy to say yes or no to joining your advisory organization, because that's really important in terms of being able to effectively recruit and onboard members. Okay, so we heard your story about how you met the Army. We heard your story about how you joined the Army and why you joined a board. Now we really want to talk about you within the context of being a board chair, because this is where a lot of officers either get confused or a little intimidated. There's some board chairs out there that are gracious and hospitable and welcoming, and there's others who are not. Right? You're not going to run into a mic in every single corps or command that you run into. And the thing about working with the board chair is if board members are these high-profile, very accomplished, decorated, confident people, the board chair is usually the top of that group, right? The alpha member of the board. And so we want the officers to walk away with, from your experience as a board chair, not just as a board member, what they should be thinking about and then what leaders like you value in serving a board. So here's the first question. What would you say is the officer that you had the best relationship? Don't name them. We're speaking anonymously. But if you think back over your tenure as board chair, I think it's 7 years now, and you think about the officers that you've worked with, what was the one officer that you had the most productive relationship with? Why, and what did they do that made it the best relationship?
Yeah, I've had the interesting experience in my 10 years on the board that I've had 4 different leaderships that I've had to work under, and they've all been good in their own ways. And I'll have to say, especially as a board chair, having leadership change every couple of years is very disruptive to the board. I understand why the Salvation Army does it, but for us, we feel like we're getting in a groove, and all of a sudden the leadership changes. And that makes it a challenge for us, because every leader's got a very different personality. They come in with different levels of experience, and sometimes we feel like we have to re-educate the executive that comes to our core, because we may know more about what's going on at the core than the new executive does. And as volunteers, we don't really want to spend that kind of time educating an executive. But nonetheless, to answer your question, I think what makes a good executive to work with is somebody who personally cares about the board member and takes the time to get to know each of us as human beings, not as board members, but just as human beings. What do we do? What do we like? And just treat us just like people, not like, we're employees or anything like that, because we're all our board members are all volunteers. We sacrifice our time to come and do this service. And so to respect that commitment that we've made as volunteers, to treat us like humans, treat us friendly and personably, and not treat us like, well, oh, you didn't do your job, and so therefore we're gonna, you don't get lunch this month, or, we don't want that kind of rigorous attitude thrown at us, and we have never had that experience. But some are a little bit more personable than others, and I think just showing that you're personally interested in your board members and what they're going through in their lives, I think it makes for a really good experience. And I'm sure you feel the same way. When somebody takes an interest in your personal life, that makes you feel a little more warmly received than if they didn't show that interest. And when you're going to have a long-term, multi-year relationship with somebody, I think it's important to do that. And so I know when I sit down with the new executive that comes in as a board chair, and I want to ramp up our new executive, first thing I do is we sit down, we talk about each other, we talk about our experiences as people, and then I go through and I just highlight, without the other board members being present, I just kind of give my perspective on all the board members, and he writes down all the names and some of the key highlights that I might say about this person is good in this way, bad in that way. Kind of give them the stuff so that they can learn ahead of time, but without having to spend all the time to learn what I've learned over time. And so they benefit from my quick highlighting of all the board members and what their key attributes are and so forth. So now he's got a cheat sheet on all the board members provided to them by me. And the previous executive probably shares some of that information back. Here's the good board members, here's the bad board members. Not that there's bad board members, but you know what I'm saying is there's some board members that are doing more than others. And that's another challenge we may want to talk about a little bit too, is how do you deal with board members that aren't really effective? And that's a challenge because there are people who get on the board and for whatever reason, they don't live up to everyone's expectations, maybe even their own. And how do you move them through and maybe say thank you for your service, but it's not a good fit? That's a whole nother thing. But treating the board as volunteers who are giving their time for the benefit of the core and treating us as human beings that we have lives and things going on in our lives, whether it's business or personal issues, get to know that stuff a little bit, and I think you're going to have a really good relationship with your board.
I love that because to summarize what you're saying, it is the relationship's a two-way street. If you notice about what Mike said, the officer had just taken some time to get to know him as a human being, as a person. What is he like? What is he passionate about? Just that simple, easy, free thing to do. And I'm not sure if you noticed, but in return, Mike said, follow me and I'll show you who to spend more time with and who to spend less time with on the board. When you humanize your relationship with your board leaders and you just treat them as human beings with respect, right, with regard to their expertise or their leadership. I'm not saying that you're going to be best friends with all of them or that you call them son or dog, right? But that you just humanize the relationship, what you'll find more often than not is that you get that in return. You get that respect and that reciprocity in return. And that's something that any one of us can do without extensive training. So I love what you said about that. What I would say to validate that is I've worked with a lot of officers in the last 10 years at every level imaginable, from commissioners all the way down to lieutenants. And the ones that always stop me dead in my tracks are the ones that ask how one of my kids are doing, but use their first name. So, hey, how's Mariah doing? Stops me dead in my tracks because the fact that they know one of my kids' names and they're asking me how they're doing, it catches me off guard. It makes me pay more attention to them. It makes me more receptive to them. So you can do these things as officers to win over your board leaders in order to make that relationship a two-way street. So you naturally segued into something that I think we're going to get more into the practical part of running a board, which I know you have a lot of insight to offer, a lot of valuable advice. But you naturally segued into, okay, we've moved beyond the front end of board recruiting and onboarding and winning people over. Now we're going to get more into the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty. But you mentioned, what do you do with board members who are not operating at the level of which you would like? So I want to spend more time in terms of learning from your leadership on how to navigate boards that are in different circumstances and conditions. And this is the question that I'll start with. What is advice that you would give officers on something that they can do that's really valuable to onboard a member who is new to a board? If they're going to be coming onto the board or in their first 2 or 3 months of serving, what would you say that they should do, or they should share, or they should consider when you really think about effectively getting a new board member up and running?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, through the help of our board brochure, setting the expectations of a new board member is critical. If we don't set those expectations, then the board member doesn't know what's expected of them, and they might flounder around. But the flip side of that is if we've well defined our expectations and somebody's not meeting those expectations, we can easily pull them aside and say, hey, you know what? One of our requirements of our board is that you participate in a committee on a regular basis. Whether you're a committee chair or just a committee member, it doesn't matter. But we expect our board members to participate in at least one of our committees. And we have, depending on what's going on, we have 5 or 6 different committees that our board operates throughout the year. And normally our committees meet monthly, although some of them are not full-time throughout the year. And so if somebody's not participating in a committee, I have to take, this is one of the harder parts of my job as a chair, is I have to sit down with that board member and say, hey, you know, Jane, you're not able to beat up on our committees like we were expecting you to. Is there an issue that's preventing you from doing that? Is there something going on? And just open a dialogue and say, here was the commitment. Why are you having trouble meeting that? How can we help you to meet that commitment? And I've had situations come up where a board member that joined with us, and after reading all of our expectations, things weren't working out, and she actually, after sitting down, just like I just described, say, why are you having trouble making our meetings or making the committee meetings? And she expressed, well, my job situation's changed, and they're expecting a lot more out of me, and I just don't have the time to commit anymore. And at that point, she made the decision on her own after my questioning her meeting her expectations. She made the decision on her, Mike, I don't think I can continue with the expectations that you have, which are reasonable under my current situation. So I think it's best for me to step down because I just don't feel like I can meet the expectations. And it made it really easy for me. I didn't have to tell her you're fired or anything like that. I just reminded her of the expectations. I asked her, why is it that you are unable to meet that expectation, in a very friendly, non-threatening way? And she came to the conclusion on her own, yeah, my situation's changed, and I think I need to step away because I'm not able to fulfill those expectations. And that was a great example of a situation that worked out well. Not always going to happen that easily, but that's one of the roles of the chair, and to work with the executive, to sit down with the board members from time to time if they're not meeting the expectations that we've defined, and try to see how we can get them to fit in or not. And if they feel like they're not going to fit in, then we just have to say, we think, unfortunately, you're not meeting our expectations, and we think it's best if we part ways because we'd like to replace you with somebody else who is willing to meet our expectations. And that's one of the things that we want to try to do, that we're not quite there yet. We want to build our board up to what we feel is an ideal level. And once we're at that level, then we can feel like, we can go and be a little bit more, focused on making sure everybody is meeting that commitment. And if they're not, we have a situation where it's easier to lose a body then when we have a full board than when we're kind of short-handed. And right now I feel like we're a little short, so we might not be as willing to criticize someone for not meeting their expectations just because we need the bodies. But once we reach our full level, then I think we can be a lot more focused on making sure everybody's meeting the expectations, because we'll have other people waiting in the wings to come and join us. And I look forward to that opportunity.
Well, so follow-up question to this situation, because it's bound to come up for all of you. Inevitably, you will run into a board member where you're questioning whether they should be on the board or not. It's going to happen. It's just human nature. It's part of the gig. There's conflicting thoughts about how to offboard. We talked about onboarding. Now we're talking about offboarding unengaged or ineffective members, right? How do you do it diplomatically? How do you do it without harming the relationship? And so some people think it should be the officer. They're the executive director, right? They're the ones who are the enforcer and holding accountability. Others think it should be the board chair, because that is the leader of the advisory organization. Some people think it's a combination of both, depending on who's better suited to do it. What are your thoughts as having navigated this situation multiple times, and what advice would you give for an officer as they approach these situations?
Yeah, I think every situation is unique. There's no two situations like that are the same. And so a good rapport with your executive as a board chair, between the two of us, we can kind of formulate the plan on how we want to proceed. Personally, I think it's the board chair's responsibility to keep the board members engaged and meeting their commitments. And if they're not, for me to say, hey, you're not meeting the commitment, just as it's my responsibility to run our board meetings, making sure that everybody's on track, on topic, and we're keeping our time schedule. I feel it's that important for me to make sure that our board members are following the expectations that we as a board agreed upon. And if they're not, to take my relationship with them and see if we can work out a solution. If I feel it's important to bring the executive in to help me, I know the executive, if I ask, he or she will do that in a heartbeat. And so it just, I whatever we think works the best, we do it. And I take the responsibility first, but our executive will be more than happy to help me if I ask.
Okay, I'm going to make you repeat something you just said a minute ago. Because did you hear his pitch about how to approach an ineffective or unengaged board member? It was very diplomatic. It was very gracious. And you referred to this when you were talking about how to broach the subject and get someone to decide on if they're on or off the boat. So can you just walk us through that talk track one more time? Because it was good.
Yeah. The whole benefit of this, where it sets the expectations in very clear words, there can't be any misunderstanding. If you've asked them when they joined the board, do they agree to these expectations? Now the onus is on them. It's no longer on us. We have defined what we want from them. They have agreed to it. If they've agreed to it, then it's very easy for us to come back and say, you know what, you are unable to meet the commitment that you said you could. How can we work that out? Or if we can't, then this is an opportunity maybe for us to part ways. And try to do it in a non-threatening way, because these are volunteers who are offering their time. It's not like an employee-employer situation. They're people. They're volunteering. We treat them with respect, but they have no one else to blame but themselves. If they read this and agreed to our expectations, if they're not meeting the expectation, it's very clear.
Love that. Very practical, humanized advice because remember, just because someone is going off your board because they couldn't meet the expectations of the board at that time doesn't mean they can't be a donor. It doesn't mean they can't be a fundraiser or someone who volunteers at events. So you want to keep the relationship intact, even though they might not actually be a board member. And another thing I want to just reemphasize that you mentioned earlier, and I think we both agree on this, as someone who has both been board chairs, we would rather have a group of 9 fully engaged and committed members than 25 people where we don't know where they stand or not. Right? I'd rather have a group of 9 people who are fully committed and on the court and invested in the board and in the Salvation Army's success than 25. So it's not always about numbers. Numbers are good. And for the record, I think for a community the size of Torrance, 25 is that sweet spot. Not too small, not too large. It's still effective. But as an officer, I think you really need to think about, actually, I'm going to use your term, executive, not officer. As an executive, you need to decide on what is your sweet spot. How many board members can you effectively manage a relationship with, compared to like what you actually need to get things done and to fundraise and to have relationships into your community. So I really love about how you diplomatically got either fired someone or got people to fire themselves. Okay, so let's move on to really more of the day-to-day aspects of a board and why Torrance has seen so much success under your leadership. Can you talk to us about how you think you love to partner and prefer partnering with an executive on how to actually run the meetings? What happens, because we were talking about this at lunch, in the best boards that you've led or served on, how do you manage meetings? Walk us through what you do before the meeting, what you do during the meeting, and then how do you ensure success after the meeting?
Yeah, that's it's really important to do that properly in order to have meetings that are effective. And so what we do as our board is we have an exec committee, and that exec committee includes the board chair, vice chair, secretary, and our we don't have a treasurer, but we have a finance committee chair who we include as part of the exec committee. And actually now we've increased our exec committee to include all of our committee chairs. So we just made that change here in January. But so what we do is within a week before our board meeting, which we meet every month, our exec committee meets with our executive on staff, and we just go over what's happened in the last month, what are our objectives upcoming, what do we want to talk about for the month. So we develop our agenda, our highlights of what we want to do, and highlights of maybe what some of the issues that our committees have accomplished in that past month. So we develop our agenda, we get everybody on board with what we expect our meeting to go like. Then shortly after the exec committee, I put out the agenda in conjunction with our executive. We develop the agenda. We put that out along with the minutes and any other documentation that we want our board to have prior to the meeting. We send that all out ahead of time to all the board members so everybody has the same information. We ask everybody to try to be on time for our meetings, because one of the things that's so important, we do our meetings at lunchtime. Most of our employees work, and so it's really important that we be respectful of their time. And so we try to keep our board meetings to exactly 1 hour or less, and we want to make sure we start on time so that we can make sure we have enough time to cover all the stuff that we need to cover. Sometimes we're good, sometimes we're not. But that's my job, too, as a chair, is to try to keep us on track once the meeting is started, to try to get us started on time, to make sure that as we go through the agenda, we're not spending too much time on something. If somebody's gone off track, I need to reel it in. That's my job as a chair, is to keep that meeting moving according to the pace that we want it to go, so that we can make sure that we cover everything in the time frame that we have, and being respectful for everyone's time. I can't say that enough time. Have to be respectful of our volunteers' time. We don't want people who say, well, you know what, you're going to talk and talk and talk, and it's going to be a 2-hour meeting instead of a 1-hour meeting. Unfortunately, I got business meetings I got to go to, so they step out of the middle of the meeting. That creates a very ineffective meeting when half of your people are starting to leave because they have other obligations. So we have to be respectful of their time. We make sure we try to cover it in the time that we have. Sometimes we have extra stuff we do. We do a once-a-year retreat of our board, where we spend a half a day with our whole board all sequestered into a room, but we have fun. We make it light, but we really focus on what are we going to do for the next year? How do we want to make some changes to our stuff? So that's part of the thing that the exec and I work together on, is how do we develop the regular meetings and our retreats so that we can make this experience as a board member enjoyable and respectful for those members who join us.
Thank you so much for that. Really helpful and insightful stuff. So for those of you in the crowd, I'm going to give you a heads up to start getting your wheels turning. And for those of you on the remote end, we're going to have an opportunity for Q&A. The best question is the one you ask. There is no wrong question here. It could be about how to run meetings, how to recruit new members, where'd you get those socks, whatever. Okay, so start to get some questions. We'll take them from the room as well as on the remote end. I'd like for you to end the panel session with, if you could give an officer who is going into the field for the first time a few pieces of advice on how to effectively run a board and work with the board chair, from all of your experience and all of the executives and officers that you have had a chance to work with, what would those few pieces of advice be? And then we'll open it up for Q&A.
Well, I think I've touched on some of them already, but I think that between the core executive and the board chair, a great line of communication is important. And no two people communicate the same way. We were just talking about that over lunch. Some people like to pick up the phone. Some people like to send a text message. Some people prefer an email, or some people do all of the above. And so learn how to communicate properly between your executive and your board chair. If you can't communicate well, that's going to create problems. So communication is key. That personal touch is important, making sure that people are understanding, you know what, I'm going to have a rough month this month. I might not be able to be at the board meeting. Let's make sure we have somebody covered up to cover for me, or to be able to spend the additional time that maybe I'm not able to, or that type of thing. Is having that understanding of what's going on in each other's lives to help make sure that we understand that things happen in life. Life happens, and we have to allow that to happen because, again, we're volunteers, we're doing the best we can, but we have primary responsibility elsewhere. The responsibility that we as a board chair and board members have is our secondary responsibility, or maybe even third or fourth. Family is important too. So there's all kinds of things that get in the way of this volunteer work. But communication's key, the respect is important, and valuing that person's time and not putting too much burden on time unnecessarily. Those are the things that I think make for the best possible relationship between the core executive members and board chair and board members.
Good stuff, Mike. Thank you so much. I'm going to share what I learned from you today, just my own little bit recap here. So my main takeaways, I have 3 of them from my session with Mike. Number 1, treat the relationship as a two-way street, right? You want to treat people and respect them and humanize your relationship with them, get to know them, get to know what they're passionate about, and build a relationship with them, if not a friendship, because that goes much farther than a transactional relationship. So that was number 1. Number 2, create upfront alignment with your incoming board members on what is expected from them. So when it's time to graciously offboard them or get them to recommit to what you need from them, you did your job up front. There's nothing harder than having that conversation after the fact when there's ambiguity or you didn't do your job in the first place. So set proper expectations and that upfront alignment on the board so that there's that clarity on what's expected from them. And the third one is the reminder that us as board members are there to do work. Some of us are there to eat lunch, but the minority of us, we are there to roll up our sleeves. We are there to make impact. We are there to help. So utilize us, put us in the game, and don't be afraid if you are asking too much, because usually with people like me and Mike, we will tell you, you're asking too much, but you won't know until you ask. Is that a fair summary? Okay, awesome. Yeah, please.
One really important thing I forgot to mention, and anybody who's been an exec with us knows this, lunch, the food that you get for lunch is so important. We work much better with good food. So
that's probably the most practical advice. Awesome. Okay, so we have 10 minutes for Q&A, and we're going to open it up to the room first. Every question is relevant and helpful. Does anybody in the room have a question for Mike?
Full transparency, I'm a lieutenant. I'm married to a second-year cadet. I have sat through many board meetings where there's been a lot of talk, but I haven't really seen anything come from it. You mentioned when you took over as chair that's when you got to start doing some interesting things. What are some examples of those interesting things?
Great question.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant, for your question. The interesting things are just keeping it on task. I mean, this is where the committees are so critical to get the board members involved. If you don't have committees, then it's just a bunch of board members. But if you've created committees that actually have a mission and they actually meet and do stuff, we make it a part of every meeting that those committee chairs have to report what they've done in the past month towards their goals of whatever we set in our exec committees. And so by getting those committees really functional and involved, then the committee chairs have to report, and now they're in the spotlight moves to them. And so that, it's not necessarily interesting, but it keeps the focus, and so when our meetings are running, there's no time for chit-chat. We're focused on the agenda. We're focused on all the committee reports. That's the biggest part of our meeting is our committee reports. And that gets everybody in the board involved. And that changes from week to week depending on what's going on at our core. I mean, obviously, Red Kettle is a big deal. We have a lot of stuff going on with that. That was one of the things we didn't talk about that I wanted to just touch on really quickly if I can, is that Red Kettle, we wanted to do a couple of things that I took on when I became chair. Is we wanted to do some stuff that would make a big difference. And we instituted 2 new things that we think are relatively new. Our goal is to get our bell ringers to be 100% volunteer. We don't want to have any more paid bell ringers. So we've made that a mission of ours, and we're moving closer and closer to that goal every year. Second thing we did is, with the reduction in the places that we can actually ring now, we've taken on a new thing that's certainly new for us, and that from what I've heard, many boards don't do this, is we've instituted kettle sponsorships. And we reach out to the community, and especially our business community, and ask them, hey, would you like to sponsor a Red Kettle program? And we're raising $50,000 and up per year just on sponsorships now, which is far more than we're actually getting deposited in the kettles. And so that was something that was new that our board kind of came up with, and we've run with it, and it's really taken off really well for us. And so we encourage people to give us their ideas on how we can do things better and different. And we've taken some of those, and it's been very rewarding.
I love that. And an example of sometimes the board is just looking for a question to answer or a problem to solve. And just asking that question, like what is a thing that has been done, is how do we start raising more funds with Red Kettle again, right? We see contributions dropping, so is there innovative ways to do that? So I think we have one question in the audience, and Mariana, I'm not sure if we have one on the field that you want to prepare, but you can go next. Reach around. There you go.
All right, so this is for recruiting new board members. So let's say you found a new candidate that maybe fits all the qualifications that would be a perfect asset for the board, and they're for it, but they're showing bias against the Salvation Army. How do you overcome that, or do you even try to overcome that? Like maybe they just have some views that they're against, that the Salvation Army is for, some programs that maybe they don't like, in a way.
Thanks for the question.
Well, that's part of what we expect out of our board development committee. Is before the prospective board member gets to our full board for a vote, our board development committee does interviews, and we try to weed that information out in that board development committee interviews, and we try to determine, is there any potential issues that could be perceived as a bias in a negative way, or some other negative thing, and that's happened to our core a couple of times when we've interviewed some prospective board members, and in that questioning that we do with the board development team. If we hear some things that we don't feel comfortable about, we as a board development shut it down and say, no, you're not a fit for us. It doesn't even go, the full board doesn't even get a vote on it. The board development committee stops it if we feel there's not a fit. Obviously, just like we expect, the board prospective board member to meet our expectations. We have certain expectations as far as how do they feel about what the Salvation Army does and what the Salvation Army's mission is, and that's in our brochure. If they don't agree to those missions, or they don't feel that those are something that they can feel comfortable upholding, they're not a fit. And it's easy to say, hey, if you can't agree to everything that's in here, including the mission of the Salvation Army, then this is not the right. Find another board. This is not the right place for you.
Yeah, great advice. And I would add the helpful framing of this. He's right. Like you want to get that alignment up front before anybody even has a chance to be considered for a Salvation Army board. But the way that I've articulated this to board prospects in the past is because we serve and we invite supporters without discrimination. We do not discriminate on who volunteers for us and who we want on our boards and who we serve. That's a strength of the Salvation Army, is no discrimination. So while you don't have to necessarily abide as a volunteer or as a board member by everything the Salvation Army subscribes to, you cannot be opposed to its mission. We have a mission that we do not apologize for, and you have to align, and you can't be opposed to our mission. So I think there's strength in inviting and having diversity in who serves, but there's a risk for having anybody staunchly opposed to our mission. We have a mission. We don't apologize for it. You have to be supportive of it, even though you might not directly align to it from any perspective whatsoever. So hopefully that's a helpful framing. Okay, we will end, and you can ask from there the last question. Before we close with the last question, let's give him a round of applause for his time and his wisdom. Thank you so much. It was a great session. And take us home with the last question.
Yeah, I think this is a great closing for both of you. Can you share some of the resources that you've talked to during your session? Can you share it with a virtual audience? Are there any resources you could share?
Yeah, so the question was, are there resources that are available for anything that you spoke to? I would just point out that the new advisory organization's resource nationally is aohub.org. If you go to aohub.org, you will see a lot and everything that's been put out there for availability, and I think I'll let you answer that from a local level.
Yeah, I think the best resource that I can offer you is and this is going to be unique for every corps, so ours isn't going to necessarily be a fit for other corps, but if you want to use this as a template for developing your own board member expectations, that's fine. The easiest way that I can have you get a hold of that is to reach out to the Torrance Corps and ask any member of staff, and they'd be more than happy to email you a copy of this brochure, or I can provide it to you guys, and you can email it out as needed or share that in any other way. Our information, we have a Corps website, the Torrance Corps website, that's available, so you can go to that. I'm not sure that this is on there because obviously that's not the main purpose of our website, is to recruit board members. We do have a board member section, so you know who our board members are. But you can reach out to anyone at our Corps who's on staff and ask for the board brochure, and that they can get that copy to you. That's the best thing I can offer.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for your expertise and your time and your generosity. We really appreciate it. And we will see everybody on the next breakout session. Thank you so much. 1:45.